everyone. Happy Friday. It is Friday. I really like Fridays. It is the 29th of September, 2023. Thank you so much for joining us on Find My Pass from Home. Friday's live. It's Find My Pass Friday. We can say it like 3 times fast, right? Find My Pass Friday, Find My Pass Friday, Find My Pass Friday. It's always fun. All right. It's Friday, and we are gathering to talk all things genealogy. My name is Jen Baldwin. I am the research specialist for Find My Past. And you're right, Kim, you get me 2 days in a row. I did a session yesterday too. We're going to talk about that. So thank you, and always happy to be with you guys, and hope that you have had a excellent week. I am doing all right. It's been a long week, though, I'll admit. We had a very busy weekend last weekend. I ended up getting a little bit under the weather, had a little bit of a fever and such, and so spent a couple days in bed, and then just spent a couple days kind of trying to frantically catch up with the rest of my life. Rose is in the comments today, so everybody say hello to Rose. Doing comments for us today, which is absolutely lovely. We always appreciate that support and help. And then all of you chiming in, of course, which is lovely. So let's see who's here. Shirley's here, and it's sunny in Cambridgeshire. It's cloudy in Stoke-on-Trent, though, according to Andrea. It's sunny in Lancashire. Your country is small, you guys. England is not a very big place, but your weather it fluctuates so much. Roz is with us in Massachusetts where it's raining. We've got people watching in Lancashire and in Vancouver, Canada, and sunny Essex. And Anya is well in Fife, sunny but windy. Shirley calling out right at the beginning. Thanks for this comment, Shirley, because I have been too enjoying this week's One Place event. If you're not familiar with what this is, oh my goodness, let me tell you about the content that they've been sharing. This is the Society of One Place Studies and the Society of Genealogists partnered together, and they're doing an anniversary event for the Society of One Place Studies. It was 10 days of content all on Facebook and YouTube. And it's live for a little while. I think you can still watch the videos. I think today's the last day, I believe. These videos are 10, 15, 20 minutes long, but they are amazing. You get just this little bit of context and snippet. You get a few suggestions on research. It's very, the topics have been really wide ranging. Like, it's just been great. Actually, I've really, really enjoyed a lot of the videos. So if you haven't seen it yet, look for them on Facebook and YouTube. Join the Facebook group. It's really been a fantastic event, and I'm so excited for them. They've put so much work into it, and it was great to see it become so successful. It's so lovely. Okay, so let's see. So thanks Shirley for bringing that up. Karen is with us in North London. I got to meet Karen a couple weeks ago when we were over in Cheshire. That was a good event. Let's see. Wendy's with us from Dallas. Janet from North Wales. Rose, of course, is in North London, and she says it is a nice bright day today, so that's good to hear. Matthew is in Watford, where it's sunny for now. Yeah. Christine is in Montana, where it's sunny but cold. Yeah, I spent a year in Montana, Christine, in Whitefish, quite close to the Canadian border, for those who aren't familiar. And it's cold in the that's the coldest I've ever been. That was crazy. I did my college internship there. Okay. Oh, yeah. Daphne tells us exactly an incredible 10-day event the Society for One Place Studies has been. Over 100 short, helpful videos. The amount of content contributed to this has just been incredible. It just blows me away. And it's this huge collaboration from a number of different organizations and individual speakers and all sorts of people. I did do a video. I hope you enjoyed it, Daphne. But just watching everybody else has just been awesome. I've just really been loving it. Oh, Kim is showing real commitment. She has COVID. I'm still watching. Kim, I hope you feel better very soon. I hope it's not too bad for you. Yeah. All right. Lots of people. Victoria's asking for a link to the Society of One Place Studies event. it looks like she got it, but yeah, Anya shared it. So thanks very much, Anya. One-place-studies.org. If you do a search on your favorite search engine, it should come up. Yeah. Okay. Any last weather reports? Maryland says it's cloudy in New Jersey. It's sunny in Colorado, but I haven't looked at the temperature yet. Let's see. 59 right now, Fahrenheit. Do the quick conversion for everybody. That is 15 Celsius. But by this afternoon, it will be in the 80s. So long sleeve for the mornings and back to t-shirts and tank tops in the afternoons and then back again. I love fall though and autumn. It's absolutely my favorite time of the year. Okay, so obviously we have a lot to talk about because it is Friday. So let's get into new records for the week. And let me get to my fancy banners and all that. Oh, wrong way. New records. Okay. We did some really cool and exciting records this week, actually. So the biggest update we put online this week was Lambeth electoral registers. This covers 1832 to 1886. So just over 50 years, but it is of course electoral register, so there's lots of names and lots of records. So there's almost 1.4 million new records added to the site in just that one collection alone. These are unique to Findmypast, so if you are looking for Lambeth in that kind of right in the middle of the 19th century, you will want to look at these collections for sure. I will definitely be using them later today. I've already realized that my work today will bring me into Lambeth, so that's exciting. And of course, Rose has shared the blog for us. Thank you, Rose. So if you need to see what the new records are in Word format, please go to the Findmypast blog and take a look at it there. Oh, right. Anya, I definitely have Lambeth relatives. I end up singing the Lambeth Walk every time I research them. It's nice. I like that. I do stuff like that too. So that is collection number 1 that we released this week. Collection number 2 is in addition to the Kent burials. This is adding into that existing collection. So that's 8,635 new records for the Kent burial collection. So if you have ancestors in Kent, that's one to take a look at. The one that I love the most, though, is the collection of the 1912 Ulster Covenant petitions. These are so cool. So the Ulster Covenant was basically a declaration against home rule, and of course, which was trying to be passed through Parliament at the time. The vast majority of people who signed this declaration are in Ulster, but they did get signatures from a number of different locations. It is a petition against home rule, and it was all signed on the 28th of September 1912. So if you read the description of the collection from the National Records Office in Northern Ireland, or the Public Records Office, I should say, PRONI, as they're referred to, you get this idea that like they basically lined up these giant queues of people to sign this petition, men and women. So it's just the mental image alone is just really neat. So they signed these petitions, and it was one of the most significant and largest political acts of the period, of getting all these people, these individuals to sign. It was ultimately, of course, not successful. The bill passed anyway, ultimately. It did lead to the Ulster Unionist clubs kind of raising this armed militia in the next year, in January of 1913, known as the Ulster Volunteer Force. That armed militia included over 100,000 men to defend the Union. And then, of course, all of this political controversy is happening um, in Ireland, and then we hit World War One, and then we get into even more political turmoil in Ireland, of course, with the Troubles, etc., and the Easter Rising. And so, yeah, it all is part of that bigger story. But these records are really incredible, and one of the things that I like the most about them is that it is men and women. So if you look at the text on the petition, the men have a little bit more of a lengthier text on the petition document itself. It talks a little bit more about what it's all about. And then the women's version basically says we support what it says on the man's petition. Really, kind of a look at kind of that social history aspect of how women were viewed at the time in terms of political circles. So I did pull up an example. So let me share my screen really quick. And so you guys can see these because they are cool. So when you are on, oh gosh, let me see if I can get this right. Right. Okay. When you are on 19 on Findmypast, trying to talk and do things at the same time. When you're on Findmypast, this is what it looks like. So this example is Annie Alexander, and you see the title of the collection here, Ireland Ulster Covenant in 1912, and then her location, right, in Derry, actually. The transcript includes all the details, right, her address, the city, and of course, then the archival reference for the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. I did not say Peroni, Liam. I said Prony. I know I saw him make that comment. Um, and then you have links to two different pages. One is to the signature image itself, and then one is to the document folder. The signature image is the one that I pulled up that actually links you out to the Prony website itself. So this is what it looks like. So again, this is the women's version. So the declaration is a little shorter and a little bit less intense in terms of compared to what the men signed. But then you get this. So this is sheet number 3, right, in this particular district. And then you get this list of women who signed this. So our Annie is right here in the middle, Annie J. Alexander. And it's got her address of Eden Terrace there. It's got at least one of her neighbors, right? Jenny Murphy, I think it says, or something. No, it doesn't say Murphy at all, does it? Anyway, Jenny is one of her neighbors on Eden Terrace. They're just beautiful images, right? It's obviously their own signature. It's, the handwriting varies. So kind of like with other collections in the UK, like the 1921 census, you get this handwriting sample, which is always so cool. I just love those moments. So this is the new collection for the Ulster Covenant in 1912. I think they're really neat. I love getting into politics, historical politics of our ancestors. I think it's a really exciting area to research. So hopefully some of you will find some people in that collection and be able to take advantage of those materials. I think they're very cool. Of course, I'm biased, but I mean, every historical record is cool, actually. Okay. So going back to the comments really quick. Oh, Janet's with us from California. Welcome, Janet. Lots of comments, what I'm trying to read. Oh, Pickles has been very busy. This looks like a good one. What is this? I've been busy this week sorting through my late mother's boxes from her loft. That is always a process. It's a process, but it's oh man, there's so much to unpack there just in that first sentence. Found some real treasures which will help with some of my research. Her diary entry for VE Day, a letter written home by my uncle in 1940s from his naval college training, a whole box of my parents' courtship letters, some of Mom's old school books, and various bits of glassware wrapped in interesting sheets of paper from the 1950s. That's so cool. That's fantastic. So I hope you're enjoying this journey of discovery. I know I always do when I get a box of stuff, but what a lovely way to spend a week. That sounds fantastic to me. I also just realized that I forgot to put up the question of the week before I started talking about new records, which means that you guys have not been able to answer the question of the week. So let me do that before we get into new newspapers. So today's question of the week is, what stories have you uncovered of your ancestors when they were children? Right. So we kind of tend to think about our ancestors in kind of 3 major components of their lives, right? Birth, and then marriage, and then death. And most of the research available to us, most historical documents occur for an individual between marriage and death as an adult. So today's question is really focused on, what have you found about your ancestors before they hit that marriage mark, before they hit their majority, before they enter the army, before they go off to university? What happens to them? How do you research them? What stories have you uncovered about your ancestors when they were children, of children's age? So that is the question of the week this week. All right. So as you guys are thinking about that, let's also talk about our new newspapers, because newspapers are amazing. So this week, we added one new title, the Walthamstow Express. There are a range of years. We've added 1894 and then 1897 to 1899. So a relatively small collection, but an important one for that particular area. We've also updated the Belfast newsletter, the Liverpool Daily Post, the Welsh edition, if you are a Welsh reader, and then the Torbay Express and South Devon Echo. So one of those, the Liverpool Daily Post, we've added a range of years starting in 1956 all the way up to 1992, um, which, if you are, I don't know, a fan of the Beatles, maybe that might be a great opportunity for a bit of research, right? 1956, covering the 69 to 71 era of the Beatles. Yeah, lots of good years in there for music lovers and early rock history lovers. Um, that is one of the ways that I got into historical research, actually, was pop, like pop music, pop culture. Walthamstow. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much. I appreciate. Oh, pronounced Walthamstow. I don't know why English is so hard. I did not practice that one enough before I started. So thank you very much for that. And Linda actually has two greats that were living there at that time. Got it first. Okay. Thanks, Matthew. Really appreciate that. And Georgia says that was her childhood town. So, Georgia, I wonder if you and Linda might have some newspaper articles in common, because you grew up there and her grandparents, two times grandparents, were there. Yeah, good stuff. All right, cool. Um, and Rose being being so nice and kind. It's a tricky one. They're all tricky. Okay. So I think, and everybody's telling me I'm frozen. Let me just check in with Rose and see if that is true. Um, Gremlins today a little bit on Facebook. Hmm. Okay, so the recommendation is to refresh your screen if you are having issues. I apologize. Okay, some of you it is happening to, and some of it is not. So, looks like I'm all right now. So I'm just going to keep talking. I cannot refresh, because if I do that, it will lose the feed, and we'd have to start over. So, please refresh your screen, and hopefully it works. And then if not, um, you can come back and watch the recording, I hope. Okay. Refresh seems to be working for lots of people. All right. So, that is this week's new records. Lots of good comments coming through about the newspaper editions, so that's really good. And then some responses to the question of the week. So let's talk about the question of the week a little bit. Now, this came up. This is a segue from yesterday's session. I mentioned when we started that I did a session yesterday as well. Some of you joined us for that. Thank you very much again for being a part of that. Yesterday's session was in recognition of Home Child Day, which occurs every year on September 28th. It is an acknowledgement day of the thousands of children who were forcibly immigrated into other countries from the British Isles. The vast majority of them went to Canada and Australia. This happened largely during the Victorian period, and up until the First World War and a little bit during the interwar period. Although in Australia, some of these efforts were still alive and going all the way up until the 1960s. These children were taken from everything they knew, and some of them at very young ages, um, and and forced into this immigration where they were then kind of um, taken in by farmers and other people who needed labor. Basically, it was not a real pleasant experience for most of these kids, although some of them did end up in um, some really good experiences. Some of them really did end up in some happy families, but most did not. And yesterday, again, was the kind of the national acknowledgement or the international acknowledgement of Home Child Day. Um, so if you missed yesterday's discussion, of course, it was recorded. We had a guest on with us from Home Children Canada, Lori Oszewski. And she is a kind of globally known expert on this particular um, population of people in these migration schemes, and she has headed up one of the largest nonprofits related to the research of these individuals for many years. So Lori was a real treat to talk to. She's just so incredibly knowledgeable. If you missed the discussion yesterday, please do check back on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel so that you can see it. Rose has put the link now in the comments. So please do check it out. If you've never heard of Home Children before, I really, or you're unfamiliar maybe with the scale of it. Linda actually left this comment just now saying it was very interesting, had no idea of the scale of it. Take a look. Watch that session. Do some reading. Find some literature. Check out their website, the Home Children Canada website. It really is just kind of mind blowing and really, in many cases, very heartbreaking. Um, but you also kind of recognize that a lot of these children grew up then to be incredible contributors to their new country, whether that was Canada or New Zealand or South Africa or Australia. Very few ended up in the United States. It was largely the dominions of the British Empire, right? So really interesting discussion yesterday. A little bit kind of break your heart moments, for sure, at least for me, for sure. So keep that in mind. It's not necessarily the easiest history to review, but it is important. And that again led me to today's question of the week, which was just kind of, how do we do that, right? So I was thinking a lot last night about if we have all of these wonderful kind of online trees, and we did talk about online trees yesterday and how they can be useful trying to reconnect and reunite these families. I think about all the people sitting over in the UK that have been doing research for so many years, and all of you have your all of your research kind of lined up, and many of you have your trees on Fund My Past, which is a wonderful way to do this. How do you kind of find those children and identify them and then go, whatever happened to that person? Whatever happened to that 7-year-old that just kind of disappears, right? They're not included in the next census for the family, or, you can't find a marriage register for them, or maybe they're just not a direct ancestor and you haven't really researched them very much. How do you kind of take it forward and go, actually, this is someone that could be interesting? How do I make sure that I get at least initial details of all the children, even if they're not my direct ancestors, right? I talk about that a lot in terms of fan research, friends, associates, and neighbors. And it's kind of the same concept, is making sure you research everybody in a generation, making sure you research all of those siblings. But then how do you kind of spot that one child or five children in a poor family, in a lower class family, and actually go, something might have happened to one or more of those kids. So think about that, right? As we're talking about through today, I don't want today's session to really be kind of home children based, but the idea here is that as a community, we could collaborate in ways today that we've never been able to do before, right? We can identify those people in the trees that are sitting for the families in the UK and potentially match them up with families in Canada and Australia and go, well, actually, those could be the same child, right? Because their life starts at 5 years old in Canada, but it ends at 4 and a half in England. How do we kind of bring those two things together? I think there's a huge amount of potential for that. So I did want to talk today about research for children in particular, because with that in mind, with that collaboration kind of concept kind of sitting in the back of my brain, How do you research children who don't have a lot of government records, right? So we have some standards, right? We have some basics. We have census records that we can look at, and birth, marriage, death, as we've already talked about. But we also have opportunities in school records. We have opportunities in workhouse and poor law records, and then of course newspaper records. So lots of opportunities for research of minors, but also in many ways is significantly more difficult. Right. Now, I think I've said everything I want to say. Let's get to the question of the week. And some of your responses. What stories have you found? So Anya responds, my great aunt wrote a biography of my great grandmother and her life. She was adopted and had an adopted brother as well. Her adoptive mother died when she was young, and her stepmother was a Disney style evil stepmother. Wow. It seems to have been a very traumatic childhood in many ways. Her father committed suicide after World War I. Wow. So that's a hard biography to read. But what a story. That's incredible. Gosh, there is definitely a lot there. There is a lot there. Ellen, in high school, my dad was in the library club. I almost said literary club. That's not right. His granddaughter's now studying to become a librarian. Oh, that's cool. I love that. Runs in the family. That's so good. Marilyn, my 6-year-old grandfather was with 2 7-year-olds. They put a board on the railroad tracks and were caught by the conductor. The little ones ended up in court where they were remanded to their parents' custody, found in a newspaper article. Ah, that's so yeah, so newspapers are definitely when our youngsters in our family tree get into a little bit of a trouble spot, newspapers can be quite quite informative. Jackie says she managed to locate records for her mother, age 6, in the Victoria Home for Sick Children, a type of sanatorium where she had TB from age 3 to 9. Oh, wow. She was only there for 6 weeks in 1927. But from the story she told, I thought she was there for years. Interesting. Because when as I was reading through the comment, age 3 to 9, I was like, gosh, she was there for a long time. But then actually, no, she was there for 6 weeks. But she had years worth of stories built up in 6 weeks. That's pretty incredible. Um, and cool that you were able to locate records. Where were those records? How did you find them? Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and what that was like? Jackie, that would be really interesting to hear. Sue, her maternal grandmother was born in North Dublin Workhouse in Ireland. She was transferred to a fever hospital for a year when she was 1, came back when she was well, and lived in the workhouse until she was 14 and was released to her mother. It's a long time in a workhouse. Hmm. Yeah, kind of tough. Some of these stories are pretty tough because usually, and what's coming across even in just your responses is that when your ancestor is a child, the easiest way to find records for them is when they get in trouble or something's wrong with them or they are of a particular class, right? And I suppose that's probably true across the board. All right, Liam has one for us, our very own Liam, who is lovely and has joined us this afternoon for you guys, morning for me. Not one I found on FMP, but when my granddad on the 1939 register, I asked about his time in Hastings, and he told me about the time he snuck out of the house and followed his older brother to school, totally unbeknownst to his parents. Apparently, it was the best thing that had happened to the older kids, seeing my 3-year-old granddad wandering into a random classroom. That's great. I love that. That's such a good story. Um, I guess, oral history is probably one of the best ways to learn, but that's assuming, of course, that the person we're talking about is still around and available to do that. Okay, I already read that one. Let's see. Scroll back down. Trying to catch up. I read that one. Ellen says, oh, no, I read this one too. Sorry. Do take that off. Kim, I found my great uncle in the 1921 census at an industrial school in Sussex, age 14, sent there because he was troubled. hmm He was, yeah, troubled. Rose, my grandfather always used to tell a story about seeing some drag queens being arrested off the Tottenham Court Road in the 1930s. He lived in Southall, but used to travel into central London a lot. I was later able to confirm his story by using our newspapers. That is so cool. Also, she wrote a blog post about it. Of course she did, because Rose is an amazing writer and writes blog posts. And every time I come up with something, I'm like, Rose, do you know anything about XYZ? And she goes, yeah, I wrote a blog post about that. And she sends me a link. So good. Mm, okay. What else? Let's see. Anya, getting into kind of some of the discovery process a bit. If I have missing relatives and they're in Scotland, I tend to look for deaths on Scotland's people. Makes sense. Some of them have their mother's maiden names noted in the indexes, so I can check from there if they married and then work back to look for any missing census records if they were put into service. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and some good suggestions here. If we kind of break this down a little bit, these are some of the tips that I had kind of jotted down as well to kind of go, how do you even make sure that you have everybody? How do you know if a child survived childhood, right? You have to put a start date and an end date to their life, so you understand what it is you're looking for, when and where and why. So, yeah, one of the things that I had kind of jotted down, of course, was that beloved trick, on the GRO birth index. If you're just trying to even make sure that your tree is complete, and you're not really sure how many kids were born, right? You put in the surname of the father as their potential last name. You put in the maiden name of the mother and the right kind of time and place, and you search without any first names, so that if there's a John, a Mary, a Thomas, and a Hank that you already know about, maybe you also find Fred and Mary and Sue, right? That are attributed children to that particular couple. If you haven't played around with that before, I highly recommend it. On the Find My Past search, you can um, uh, control your search parameters in a way that allow you to kind of discover all of those kids, which is fantastic, especially if they're born and or die in between census years, right? Um, because then you get them all, right? And Anya's saying, yeah, that GRO trick you can use on Find My Past and on Scotland's people, which is absolutely true. So, if you have Scotland research to do, um, definitely Scotland's people is a good tool for that and a good way to kind of use that same technique. As a side note, I'm taking a course on Scottish research in 2 weeks, and I'm really excited, as I've never really done any serious Scottish research before, and I can't wait to kind of dig into all those records. Um, so I'm really excited about that. Okay, what else have you guys said for the question of the week? Um, Daphne kind of giving us the opposite view, right? Sadly, I know nothing about my family's childhood. I never knew my mother's paternal side and only met her maternal mother a handful of times. Only met my father's mother once and never met his father. So, those of you with access to grandparents cherish every moment. Is so true. So true. Um, but it does kind of open the door to us for a discussion around, how do we then do that, right? How do we take a situation like Daphne's and learn about their childhood and actually understand a little bit more, even if it's just contextual, instead of that kind of personal narrative? How do we do that? How do we find those materials? Um, One way, of course, would be newspapers. So Daphne, thanks very much. Perfect segue into one of the examples I had pulled up for today. Um, the newspaper collection on Find My Past is incredible, and the British Newspaper Archive. So one of the ways that we can do that is just by doing kind of generic searches. So in your example, Daphne, I would find kind of a specific location, and I would find a range of years, like a decade, right? Like they were born in 1923 and so I want to go from 1923 to 1933-ish, right? To see what was going on in their world in those first 10 years of their life. I did that this morning just to kind of play around, and I used a couple of keywords. Let me add this to the screen here. So I actually just searched for the keywords young and child as independent keywords, not necessarily in a phrase, but the article that came up initially was this piece on the clothing of the young child and how they're basically talking about reform of the lower classes and the working classes. Um, and and there this is a what is the newspaper here? This is the 3rd July 1929 from Leicester Mail. Had to think about that one for a second. And so it's 1929, right? And they're talking about how mothers are still under the misconception that clothes give warmth and do not realize that they only conserve it. And how moms kind of address things like when the child gets a cold or something, right? So these are very generic articles, but they do give us insight and understanding of what was being talked about during the day and how mothers were being addressed and how parenting techniques lasted or didn't last, and what was trendy, what was not, right? So you get all of this kind of wonderful contextual piece of information that tells you about how parents were behaving at the time. But then right next door is this article for babies' dresses, gowns, robes, bonnets, right? Prams, all this stuff. So you also get this wonderful concept of how much things cost and like what were parents paying for, and little illustrations of the products that were being used. I think stuff like this is actually really interesting because it gives us a chance to really dig into actually what were they wearing, what were they what was the articles and advertisements like this give us the opportunity to say, well, clothing was made of these types of fabrics, and this particular brand of a pram or a stroller, as we would say in the US, and the features that it included, right? A corner shield on the hood. Frames could be chosen. You can pay over the process, starting with a small deposit when the baby is born, refunded in full if not required, right? So even thinking about whether or not the mortality rate of the time period, and whether or not that baby would survive. And this whole page is full of stuff like this, right? So you get all this wonderful context about child rearing, and actually, in fact, it is part of National Baby Week, which I'd never heard of until this morning when I found this newspaper print. And it's these types of pieces, and newspaper print that really give us the chance to go, what did a nursery look like during this time period? Well, there's a photograph of a typical average, this is a model house, right? Furnished to kind of advertise Baby Week, right? Like, it's an incredible amount of information when you maybe are kind of looking for newspaper content on a specific name. You can look in a much more generic way and find that information. I know we've talked about that before, and I know I prattle on and rattle on about newspapers all the time, but they really are so, so good for so many different things. Okay, let's go back to question of the week responses. Um, Jackie responded. Thank you, Jackie. I love this. So this is going back to her comment about that she was able to find records of um, her ancestor that we read off earlier. So started with the local historical society, always a great first step, run by two women, mother and daughter, who were very helpful, sending me lots of links. Most historical societies are. I love that. I love that kind of acknowledgement that they are doing what they're doing because they're passionate about it too. I think that's a really lovely thing to say. I followed those, went to the Kent archives and spoke to another helpful chap, because we all love what we do, right? Who told me how to request medical records held by a local university. It was a challenge. I had to prove that I was a relative. I would say pretty common for medical records or institute records, that kind of thing. I did not see the record, but was given the information that I needed. Also had photographs of my mother, thankfully labeled. That's fantastic. And I know this comment continues. It gets cut off a little bit on my screen. That's okay. I will read the rest. But kind of shows you the process a little bit, right? There's an opportunity there for all of us to go local historical society, which feeds me into a number of different opportunities, which then feeds me to a local archive, in this case, a university archive, which feeds me into someone else who can help and who knows about that material. And you kind of just follow all the steps. It's great. That was a great example, Jackie. Thank you so much. Um, Matthew, this is a treasure, but also a disappointment, right? I have a wonderful picture of my uncle, aged 14 months. Sadly, I gained it after my uncle had died, so knows nothing about the background of the picture. But I mean, you have it, which is good. Um, hmm, yeah, it's a bit of a shame when you have no one to answer those questions. Victoria telling us that her great great uncle saved a boy's life when he was age 12 in Newcastle upon Tyne, awarded a prize. He sadly died November 1914 during World War I after he got married. This event was in the newspaper. Yeah. I'm trying to remember if I talked about this on a Friday's Live or somewhere else, but I was recently doing some research in the Quarry Bank area, right? Quarry Bank Mill for style. Um, and I was trying to, I think that's where this story came from. I don't know. Anyway, I was trying to prove a relationship, and I was having a hard time like pinpointing which, because it was a common name, which family was which. Um, and I was actually able to find an entry in a newspaper article that said that this young girl, I think she was 12, had tried to save her grandmother from a fire, and it named both the girl and the grandmother and then the middle generation as well eventually across this article because of this attempt at a heroic act. Unfortunately, the grandmother didn't survive, but there were, then subsequent articles about this family, and that was how I actually managed to put the tree together, was through this newspaper article about, this kind of event. So yeah, these newspapers, you guys are so good. If you're not using newspapers, you're really missing out. All right, Wendy, when my grandmother was in her late 90s, we recorded her telling about her childhood. That's so cool. She had marvelous stories, some probably exaggerated, but also began quoting the poem she memorized in sixth grade for an end of school program. That's really neat. That's so cool. I'm really lucky that my dad and I do a lot of this kind of stuff together, and he is a retired photographer. So a couple of years ago, a Thanksgiving dinner, right? We're all sitting around the table, and he had set up a camera in the background, and it took a picture like every 3 seconds for like 3 hours. And he ended up turning it into a video. And then the next year, he did a video capture of the entire meal and then edited it down. So you get all the little family stories that tend to come out at these kind of holiday traditional meals. And then he takes out, he spends hours doing this kind of stuff, right? He takes out all the extra of like, past the turkey or whatever. Um, it was that kind of thing is really incredible. One of the things that my parents did when I was little, it recorded part of my childhood, and we didn't know about this for a long time actually. They hid a tape recorder somewhere in the room on Christmas morning, and as soon as we hit the Christmas tree, he pushed record, and it captured myself and my three siblings opening our presents on Christmas morning. And I don't know, I was probably like 5 or 6, maybe even maybe 7. And then years later, when we're all adults, they come back and they've got this box under the tree, very small cassette tape size, and it says this is a present for all 4 kids, and we were all there, and it was one of the times, rarely kind of now, when we were all able to be at mom and dad's house for Christmas morning with our spouses and children, etc. And so we open it up, and dad puts this tape in the stereo system and plays it, and I mean, we were all just in tears, right? Because this was just such an incredible thing. I think today, like my daughter tends to take stuff like that for granted because we have our phones and our devices and we're recording everything and we're taking thousands and thousands of pictures every day. Um, but for me growing up and for many of you and the generations before us, something like that would be a real treasure. Um, yeah. So Leslie actually adds on to this, right? Highly recommend looking for any sound archives, kind of what we were just talking about, can complement the written word. And yeah, the British Library is a great place to go for that kind of material. It's an excellent suggestion, Leslie. Um, we can hear people speaking about their own childhood community or a particular situation in their own words, right? We did, if I'm my past, we did the World War One, sorry, World War One POWs that were recorded as part of a dialect study in a German prisoner of war camp. So they're all saying the same thing. They're reading a passage from the Bible, but you get all these different dialects across the UK from that period. Yeah, that kind of stuff is fantastic. I love it. Um, Karen, it's okay that you're late. It's okay. We're happy to have you no matter what. And your question of the week response, I discovered that my granddad was born in the workhouse. Wow, which was a sad thing to find out as I didn't expect it. My mom knew nothing about it. So yeah, I think, there is a part about um there is a component there about just um what is talked about inside our family and what isn't, right? And sometimes you really have to kind of pry and get really nosy, right? My grandmother was like that too. She's the one who started me in genealogy, but she never talked about her family. She only talked about her husband's family, and her husband's family is very interesting, and I've spent years researching them. but I always wanted to know more about her, and she was kind of ashamed of where she came from. And um, she didn't like to talk about her family. Her mother was a harsh disciplinarian, and was a German from Russia. So her mom was actually first immigrant from Russia, and then ended up in Canada, and then from Canada down into the United States. But her husband had abandoned her. She'd ended up getting married again. It wasn't the most pleasant of lives, right? So my grandma didn't ever tell me any of that. It was not until after she passed away that I researched that and was able to put that story together. But it does kind of go to that idea that we do kind of have to be a little bit like tough sometimes and be like, you need to tell me these things. Yeah. Um, right. And let's see. And we have a suggestion from Sandy, who would like more records from a particular location. Thank you so much, Sandy. As Rose said, we will talk to our team and see what we can manage, what we can pull together. But we invite this type of feedback. We really, really want to know what you guys are interested in accessing. Um, I sit on the licensing team partially as part of my role, and feedback like this is really, really helpful. So keep it coming. And if you have other suggestions, send them in. And that's not corporate talk. We really do want to know. You can send them to support@findmypast.com, and we will read those comments and we will get those emails and we'll see what we can do. Now, it may take a couple of years depending on the situation, but we will do our best. Okay, so a couple of you in your question of the week have mentioned the 1921 census. And I actually wanted to kind of go back to how I started this discussion about children with the idea of the home children. The 1921 census is actually really valuable tool for that particular type of research. So I do want, I know that many of you are very fluent in the 1921 census now, but it's still such a great opportunity for research. I want to make sure that we kind of every once in a while go back to that and take another look at it. And the reason for that is because the search capability on the 1921 census is unlike anything else we've ever published. There is an advanced search available that has over 40 fields that you can search on, which is a huge number, right? I mean, it's just an incredible opportunity for researching in so many different ways. And I wanted to do this in particular with an eye to the home children that we talked about. So this is the advanced search page on the 1921 census. Many of you probably just use the basic search, which just says first name, last name, the location that they were in, and when they were born. If you click on advanced search, you get to this screen, which again, I'm sure a lot of you have seen and taken advantage of. But as you scroll, you see all of these different search fields. It's a huge, huge search farm. And this, again, is because we wanted to make sure that you had everything you needed to be able to access the census for the people or institutes that you were interested in, institutions. Um, so in addition to the search fields, right, and the huge variation of opportunities for research, we also have this list of useful links and resources. So if you scroll down past all those search fields, you get this list of stuff. Don't ignore this list of stuff because it's really, really helpful. You will get the different types of schedule codes, you get the occupation codes, employment industry codes, etc. All of these you can search by. So, right. So if you wanted to search for military census returns in particular, you can actually click on the browse schedule type code, and hopefully this works in a live demo. It pulls up this list of codes. And that list that I just showed you under useful links and resources tells you what all of these things mean. Now, the military returns are under the NM category, like New Mexico. And if you select that, it will just search the military returns, right? But you can also do this for institutions and prisons and all sorts of different places, right? So if you click on the, where's the list? I've lost it now. Here, no, here we go. Institutions and prisons down here towards kind of the middle of the screen. You end up, I think it's this tab. Nope, wrong one. You end up here. So it's an article page. This is schedule type code. I did it wrong. Here we go. You end up here. This is an article page on Find My Pass, and you can see that there's some introductory text, but you can explore the following types of institutions, right? So you've got hospitals and you've got nonconformist interest institutions, right? So anything related to nonconformists. You've got hotels, deaf history, you've got convents, um, prisons, the Salvation Army, all of these different types of organizations and bodies that created their own census return because they had a certain number of people staying in that residence or that location at on the night of the census, right? So one of those is a list specifically for Dr. Bernardo's. So these are all of the locations for Dr. Bernardo's that we were able to identify in the 1921 census. When you click on that, you get into this very long list. And it is incredible. Rose has shared the link in the chat. It is and she called it the amazing list of institutions. It really is amazing. Um, it, it took a long time to build this list, and hats off to just literally one of our colleagues, Steve, who just did an incredible amount of work on the 1921 census as a whole, but also really took this list to its fullest capacity, we feel like. Anyway, so you get to this list of Dr. Bernardo's homes, and it gives you the piece number, the county, the district name, the enumeration district number, and then the name of the institution. So you can search on any one of these fields and end up in the census return for these particular um, institutions, these particular buildings, right? So just as an example, I pulled up the one in Essex in Romford. So this is Dr. Bernardo's Village Homes in Barkingside. And then of course the census return looks like this. I'm going to close the film. It's many, many pages long, and gives you an idea of the range of individuals that were living at or being held at a Dr. Bernardo's homes at the time of the 1921 census. So in this one page, we have a 4-year-old Frances whose parents are both still alive as we zoom in. She is from Cornwall. She is going to school whole time, and that is all of the information that is provided about her. But can you imagine being 4 years old, knowing that your parents are still alive, but you're in this other place? It's a really yeah, the mental image is just intense. And you also have 15 and 16-year-olds who are in domestic service. This young lady Gertrude here is a dressmaker, right? That's her occupation. But you can see the combination of why the 21 census is so informative, right? You don't just have a name and a place of where they were born, and you get their ages down to the month. And then you also, this orphan column, I think is really informative, right? You get this idea of, are both parents still alive? Is just the father died and maybe from the war or some other event, but a lot of them are going to be because of World War One. Is the mother dead? And like in this case with Catherine, right? She is 13 and her mother is deceased. So maybe the father just couldn't take care of her and any other siblings. Down at the bottom, we have and I'm not Violet. I'm not really sure what the name is here. Victoria Smith. Anyway, down at the very bottom, she is 7 years old, and her parents are unknown, right? And she doesn't know where she was born. You have nothing about her, right? So there's this huge opportunity in the 1921 census for telling these stories. And Dr. Bernardo's homes are just one example, but you also get schools and universities, and as Karen says, epilepsy homes, um, right? All these different opportunities for us to learn about these different kinds of institutions and to see where the children were being located, where they were actually living. Were they at a fever or an isolation hospital? Right. And the list of hospitals goes on for a long time. Right. But there's all these different categories of locations where they may have been on census night. And it really does give us a lot of information and the opportunity to research further as we look into the lives of the children. Right. Okay. I have rattled on for a long time. I didn't actually realize how long into the hour we had gotten. Okay. So, let's oh gosh, we have suggestions coming in for newspapers. I love it. Rose, I hope you're writing this down. I'm sure you are. Daphne is looking for a particular Bournemouth and Pool Evening Echo. I think I said that right. Not sure. Um, oh, and Rose has responded. We have some early years. That's great. We have some interest in the Hackney Gazette for the 40s, 50s, and 60s. We'll put that on the list, Georgia, and see what we can do if it's not already there. Although, of course, Rose will probably answer you if it is already there. Gina, adding to our conversation about children, just saying my step granny was in an orphanage known as cottage homes on the 1921 census. It seems she was badly treated there. Oh, that's yeah. So when placed, she wasn't actually an orphan, but her mother had died after having another child who also passed. That's quite sad, Gina. So it actually does raise a good kind of last question for us: is historically the way we refer to orphans today is um, not necessarily the way that orphans were referred to I said that backwards because I was reading two things at once. Okay, let me start over. The way we use the word orphan is not necessarily the same way that they used the word orphan 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So there's a language thing there, an interpretation piece there that we need to understand, and we need to make sure that we get all of the information we can about how language was used during the time period in which we're interested in. So in this case, yeah, um, a lot of people did think that if you were an orphan, if your father was passed away, no, didn't matter what the status of the mother was. So your comment about not a true orphan, that's really relevant in today's terms, but it's also something we need to understand, and it's language that we use a lot when we're talking about home children as well, which is what we started with today. As we wouldn't refer to most of those children as true orphans in today's vernacular. um, at least one parent was still alive when they were put into this position where they were forced to migrate. So it's very important that we understand the terminology and the context of what we're talking about. um, okay, there was a question that I want to pop in. Adrian, I think that's how you say it. You've used the term census night. Was the 1921 census actually conducted in one night? And the answer to that is yes. That was the intent. And actually, if you look through the newspapers, you can see all sorts of instructions for weeks leading up to how you were supposed to do this in an individual household. The forms were sent in advance to the each household, and then the head of household was supposed to sit down on census night, and actually kind of that night. I think there was a set number of hours it's supposed to do it in, but of course, who knows if that really happened. Household over household, right? And fill out the census return as to who was in that building on that particular night. So yes, it was conducted in one night, and then the enumerators came back in over the course of the next couple of days and collected all of those forms, and then they were supposed to make corrections. So you'll see things like a child being listed on the census. There's one particular example I'm thinking of where it says on the census form the baby is 2 years old and hasn't been named yet, because they followed the instructions and they filled out the census on the night of census night. Obviously, after the birth of their most recent child. Um, it was the dad who filled out the census, not the mom, unsurprisingly. Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, I think that covers it. And I just talk and then I forget where I'm at in terms of timings. I did want to, beyond newspapers and some of the other records that we've talked about, the 1921 census, the GRO birth index. I mentioned school records and workhouse and poor law records, that kind of thing. But I also wanted to bring up, there was one publication that I found actually earlier this week that I thought was interesting. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I just wanted to point it out as a reference because I'd never heard of it before. It's called the Journal of the History of Childhood and Youth. It's published in the United States, but it appears to cover kind of all sorts of international topics. So if you're really interested in investigating kind of childhood years and adding that to your repertoire of your research opportunities, that might be something that you're interested in looking at. It's published. We're gonna post the link here in just a second. It's the Journal of the History of Childhood and Youth. There we go. Thanks, Rose. She was reading my mind. I did not look at things like pricing or anything like that. I just found that the journal existed and went, that seems interesting. It's something I want to investigate further. So now I'm sharing it with all of you so you can investigate it too, if that's something that you might be interested in. Okay. So I think that covers it. It is Friday. It's the end of the week. I hope you guys all have a fantastic weekend. It's always a delight to be with you. So thank you so much for your time. And we will see you next week with more new records and more new newspapers. So happy researching and good luck with everything that you're working on right now.